Amiga was a very special system to me. Not only I always loved reading about its capabilities, but I also liked learning what it could do in the right hands. But while it being used for special effects in various TV series was interesting, where it never failed to amaze me were the games, especially those little known obscure titles that either released to no fanfare or just straight up were ignored by a general populace of gamers at the time. This video, a third in the series, covers another 10 of these hidden gems. So without further ado, let's get to it. Stormmaster is a turn-based strategy in a very unique setting, part medieval, part sci-fi world. You are leading your country of Eolia in an ongoing war against its neighbor, Sharkania, and your goal is straightforward, to destroy any and all enemy cities and win the war. While the strategic layer is entirely turn-based, battles are actually real-time and take place in the skies where your air fleets face those of an enemy or their air defenses. But it's not all about the battles. Well, most is, but not all. Anyway, you'll be also sending ministers all around your country to develop and industrialize the regions to help with the war effort. And you'll partake in religious ceremonies praying to increase the natural wind energy of your nation so that the winds are more favorable to you and yours. A surprisingly fun part of the game is the ability to design and prototype your own ships. Stormmaster is not your everyday strategy, it's very unique and rare, so rare in fact that I first learned about it while working on this video. And I know some of you probably knew of it already, but I went through literally couple thousands of games back then, both commercial and public domain, and never came across this one. Odd. Resolution 1-on-1, aka HoverForce, is set in the future in the US in the city of Las Vegas, as opposed to well-known by you, Las Vegas. By 2038, when the game takes place, the crime is rampant and the law enforcement just cannot contain it all. So a new law, so-called Resolution 1-on-1, was passed, which allows convicted felons to be released from jail in return for working as bounty hunters of sorts, tracking down criminals and gang bosses. And you're one of those former prisoners. You're given a hovercraft armed with machine gun and are sent to dispose of the criminals. The game is a full 3D vehicular shooter that takes place in an open city divided into 4 areas, each of which is controlled by a different drug lord. Those drug lords obviously are not who you're faced against straight up and have to shoot your way through many of their minions first. Defeated enemies leave money and drugs behind, and the latter you collect as evidence obviously, wink wink nudge nudge. While the graphics of Resolution 1-on-1 are very simple by today's standards, they're not bad for 1990 and allow the game to run pretty smoothly. If you enjoy games like that, HoverForce is definitely worth a look. Statix is an interesting puzzle game that's as simple in its premise as they come and yet very addictive and fun. It's basically Tetris mixed with Puyo Puyo on a balancing board. The square blocks that fall from the above have different symbols on them. If you line up 3 identical symbols, blocks with them disappear. You have to place those falling bricks on both sides of the scale board, making sure that it balances and doesn't lean to either of the sides too much. Because if it does, it's game over. The further from the center of the scales the blocks are placed, the more dramatic they affect the balance, so it's worth making sure to even them out as good as possible. But in the same time you have to remove as many blocks as you can, as the balancing board has a very limited weight it can carry. And when there's too many of them on the board, it drops a notch, giving you less leeway with balancing and making the game overall more difficult. Statix also offers a simultaneous 2-player mode which can be played either against each other, with player whose side becomes overstocked losing, or cooperatively working together to progress further and beat more and more levels. Statix is quite fun, even if at times a tad repetitive. So if you're into logic games, give it a go, it may end up being something you might actually enjoy. Deliverance is a sequel to Stormlord that released 3 years earlier on the Amiga, and it's an 8-way scrolling action platformer. Same as in Stormlord, you have to rescue as many fairies as possible, catching them out of sky as they fall down. It's easier said than done, however, as they tend to drop in least expected places, often right into fire pits, and you have to grab them while in the same time fighting off various enemy creatures, like bats, spiders or goblins to name a few. Some might say that Deliverance is similar to Gods, but other than having comparable viewpoint and always scrolling, the games are different. Deliverance features bigger, more difficult levels and huge sprites, both for your character and enemies. Some of which, especially bosses, are so large in fact that they take considerable chunk of entire screen space. And last level switches classical platforming to your character riding the back of an undead dragon in a shoot-em-up fashion. On the flip side, Gods feels a bit more polished, as if the devs had a bit more time to complete the game and just tie in all the loose knots to offer a fully finished product. Deliverance's animation is a mixed bag, some parts are very fluid while others feel a bit choppy, as if they could use a few extra frames to help with smoothness. Overall, however, both graphics and sound design are pretty high quality and are no reason to complain whatsoever. The game originally released on 8-bit systems, but this 16-bit iteration has been remade from ground up and expanded upon, so comparing the two would serve no real purpose. Deliverance is an interesting title, especially if you like fantasy action platformers or feel like you have an afternoon to waste and can't figure out what to play. Then this is pretty good pick. Even though it was developed by Bullfrog and published by EA, Flood is mostly an unknown platformer. You play as Quiffy, a rather unusual named character, so a smaller Quiff. And while it may correspond to his haircut, there's also a more modern definition of that term that we'll not discuss here in detail. For those unfamiliar or interested, however, it can be found in Urban Dictionary. Your task in each level is to collect various pieces of litter and then get to the surface from the sewers and tunnels that you're in. And you better act fast though, as they are flooding. And you can swim through water, but only breathe on the surface, so you can't stay submerged for too long. If that wasn't enough, the sewers are filled with enemies and there's even a ghost chasing you in each level. It starts moving approximately 15 seconds after you do and follows you around the sewers, copying your movements. Quiffy can walk on walls and ceilings, however, so make sure to use that skill to avoid the ghost for as long as possible, as when he gets to you, he will hurt you. Like all ghosts do, really. And who you gonna call? Ghostbusters. While you start with no weapons, 5 different can be found, picked up and used against enemy creatures, but only 1 can be carried at a time. And since we're on a subject, there are different kinds of enemies, all following their very own unique patterns of movement and most having unique skills assigned to them. When shot, they drop a heart that you can use to regain health. A very interesting aspect of Flood derives from its title, namely water physics. I'm not sure that's the right description of it though. But if not, let's call it a water behavior model that seems to direct its flow and speed of filling up of any cavities quite realistically for the time. Flood is pretty cool, I gotta say, and while I haven't seen it before working on this video, it definitely deserves a spot on my to-play list, as it looks like something that I would find fun. Megaball is a public domain game, meaning it was distributed freely in reduced format with less levels, but after registering and paying for a full version, all features are unlocked. It is also the best version of Arkanoid or Breakout on the system. And with all the levels available and extra paddle upgrades, it offered hundreds upon hundreds of hours of fun. If you've never played either, let me explain. The game is a single-screen arcade title where there are colorful bricks on top of the screen arranged in various patterns and you control the paddle at the bottom that is used to bounce the ball at the bricks to destroy them. When destroyed, they drop upgrades from time to time, which can range from simple paddle size enlargement through ability to hold the ball to mounting paddle with cannons that can shoot powerful projectiles, to name a few. The level is completed when all bricks are cleared and you lose a life when the ball is not bounced and falls through the bottom of the screen. It's a simple but addictive mechanic pioneered by the all-time classic Arkanoid. I don't think that there are many games in the genre even today that could compare to Megaball's ingenuity. Perhaps early 2000s DX Ball on PC could, but even if that's the case, it would still leave Megaball as one of the 2 best Arkanoid clones ever made. If you like those kinds of games, Megaball is one that you should not skip. Kikugi is a computer adaptation of an ancient Japanese game of logic. It has incredibly simple rules, easy to understand and follow, but it's devilishly tough to master. The aim is to jump one peg over another, removing the one you jumped over for so long until you're left with just one peg. As you can guess, with most logic games like that, the key is to think as many steps ahead as you can. Planning your moves as a single bad one in the beginning may end up ruining the game for you many moves ahead. Kikugi is definitely not a game for everyone, because it's a mixture. On one hand, a gameplay is slow and relaxing, on another, the difficulty can render the game incredibly frustrating to some. You can reverse one move, but that's it, that one move only, and you can't go back any further. But if you're someone who likes tough logic games, it's as demanding as they come. Kikugi offers 15 differently themed game boards with different number of pieces on each. So start with the simpler, see how you feel about it, before you move on to the more challenging ones. By 1995, most Western developers were releasing either their last or penultimate games on the Amiga. But the system was still very popular and with steady user base in the East, in recently independent former Eastern Bloc countries like Poland or Lithuania. And the developers there did not plan on abandoning the system anytime soon, especially that in their eyes it was still very capable and popular machine. Enter Lost in Mine, a puzzle platformer by a Polish developer Wookiesoft. At first glance it may not look like much, but looks are often deceiving. And this is the case of that exactly. It's an excellent, even if at times mind-boggling puzzler with a very simple premise at heart. All you have to do is get to the exit. Simple as that. But it's not the destination, it's the journey. And it's that journey that is what's great and challenging about it. Unlike many other games in the genre like Lemmings or Humans, you don't pick actions from a list of skills or buttons, you have to platform your way out using various installations and machines spread in strategic locations around levels. And they can be any and all mining equipment, from simple drills and lifts through harvesters to even explosives among others. Some controlled manually, other remotely at that distance. Oh, and don't get discouraged by the fact that it's in Polish, as other than on the title screen, you won't really see it anywhere else. The Misadventures of Flink is an action platformer and an excellent example of a game that is plagued by one small but very important issue. It was only ever released on CD32, short-lived and least spread out of all Commodore systems. So even if the company would not went bankrupt, the game was unlikely to gain any serious recognition based on the size of CD32's user base. All that aside, Flink is probably the best looking platformer on the Amiga. It's a beautiful game with buttersmooth animations that could easily rival, at least graphics-wise, the best releases on 16-bit consoles of the time. In fact, it was released on Sega Genesis as well. Keeping in mind that Genesis could only display 64 colors on screen at once, it made me feel that if parallax scrolling was dropped entirely to remove the extra bit planes, it would be feasible to have it running on regular and most widespread A500 in a reduced 32-color mode. And it still would look amazing. But that perhaps was just something that the developers were not keen on attempting, did not have the budget for, or were limited by an aggressive deadline. We'll never know. One way or another, if you have an access to CD32 and a copy of Flink, I wholeheartedly recommend you try it, as it's a really good title. Games like Transplant make me wonder how names for the games back in the day were conceived. I mean, it's a space shooter that feels like a mix of Asteroids and any other generic sci-fi shoot-em-up, and yet the devs decided that Transplant is a good name for it. I mean, there's gotta be a reason, right? I've no way of learning it, but it can't just be random word, can it? Maybe because it's a concoction of ideas transplanted from other games to make this odd and playable mix. Or perhaps the devs just sat at the table, wrote all the ideas down, threw them in a hat and pulled the first one. I suppose we'll never know. One way or another, Transplant is an arcade shooter in top-down 360 degrees viewpoint, where you're free to fly around the map destroying rocks and various enemies. When all objects in a particular level are destroyed, you move on to the next one. Since the movement is free, it may have been tough to locate that last small enemy somewhere in the corner of the map, so you have a radar. But unlike any other game in the genre, it's not a rectangle on the side or top of the screen, but rather dots surrounding your ship. Each dot represents one target that needs to be cleared, and its distance to your ship corresponds proportionally to real distance between the two. The game starts with 3 lives, and you can upgrade your ship or buy more lives between the levels for the money that you earned during battles. Flexibility, power and shields are the stats that can be raised through set upgrades, and each has 5 levels of quality. Rather innovatively, Transplant features a very interesting password system. When your last life is lost, you receive a password for that stage. And when you restart from that point, you not only have a full set of lives, but also all your upgrades have been sold off and you're left with the monetary equivalent to upgrade your ship. This time perhaps with another combination of those parts to not fail again. If you like shooters, check Transplant out, it's fun. So, what do you think, guys? Did any of the games seem familiar to you and weren't as obscure as they were where I come from? Perhaps they look like something you'd like to try? Or maybe you know of a very good and yet entirely unknown game that no one seems to ever mention and you'd love to see it in a video. Let me know and let's discuss it in the comments below. I actually do read every single one of them and respond where I can. After all, preservation of those oldies is up to us, talking about them, sharing memories, as otherwise they will just cease to exist with the last memory of them fading away. I'd like to give my special thanks to people whose gameplay footage I've used in this video. Their playthrough videos are excellent recordings of what the games were back in the day, and they did hell of a job playing those titles, way better than I ever could. They helped the retro gaming community grow, and for that, once again, thank you. If you believe that Amiga had the best gaming library in the early 90s, hit the like and subscribe buttons below. If there was a better one on another system, more robust and varied, share the video and let me know in the comments. Allow me to defend the Ami. And if you're in a generous mood, you may want to consider joining my Patreon or YouTube members, and join the incredible beast that you see on the screen now. With their help, I can release better videos, I'm saving up for the camera, and most of all, hoping to eventually replace my editing rig so that it wouldn't hang at every single render, and allow me to make more content faster. All the videos are released on Patreon approximately a day early, and I share updates on what's coming there too, so if you'd like to influence the future of this channel and learn what's coming beforehand, all that's there. If you can't or don't want to do that, likes and subscribes are amazing too. For now, however, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.